Welcome back to Ethos Trek. I'm Sera. Over the past 3 episodes, we've built a comprehensive understanding of collective narcissism, the psychology behind it, how it was weaponized historically, and how it manifests in American politics today. If you haven't listened to those episodes, I'd encourage you to go back. What we're discussing today builds directly on that foundation. But understanding a problem isn't the same as solving it. And you're probably thinking, great, now I understand what I'm dealing with. What do I do about it? That's what these final 2 episodes are about. Today, in part 1, we focus on individual counter strategies. What the research tells us actually works when you're trying to reach someone who's been pulled into collective narcissistic patterns. In part 2, we'll cover systemic approaches, how communities, institutions, and movements can respond. I want to be clear about something from the start. There are no magic words, no magic potions, no perfect technique that will instantly undo years of radicalization. What we do have is research, documented interventions that have shown effectiveness, and documented approaches that, backfire. The goal isn't to change everyone. It's to know where your efforts can make a difference and to avoid wasting energy or making things worse. So let's get into it. The proven intervention, mindful gratitude. Let's start with what the research has actually proven works. Dr. Agnieszka Golec-Zavala, the researcher whose work has grounded this entire series, published a remarkable finding in 2023. Her team tested whether a mindful gratitude intervention could reduce the prejudiced attitudes associated with collective narcissism. The intervention was simple. Participants engaged in a 6-week practice combining mindfulness exercises with gratitude journaling. That's it. No confrontation, no debate, no attempt to change their political views directly. The results? After 6 weeks, individuals high in collective narcissism showed significant reductions in prejudiced attitudes toward outgroups. The intervention didn't target their beliefs directly. It addressed the underlying psychological needs that collective narcissism serves. Why does this work? The researchers explain that collective narcissism often stems from unmet needs for self-worth and significance. When people cultivate gratitude, genuine appreciation for what they have, and mindfulness, present moment awareness without judgment, they become less dependent on the inflated group identity to feel valuable. The defensive posture relaxes because there's less to defend. This is crucial information. It tells us that the pathway to reducing collective narcissism isn't through argument. It's through addressing the emotional needs underneath it. Why direct confrontation backfires? Now let's talk about what doesn't work, because this is where most people waste their time and energy, and often make things worse. Remember the core feature of collective narcissism, hypersensitivity to perceived threats? When you directly challenge someone's beliefs, telling them they're wrong, presenting contradictory evidence, criticizing their leader, what happens? You trigger the threat response. And the threat response in collective narcissism isn't just defensiveness. It's defensive aggression. The research shows that criticism activates the exact psychological mechanisms that reinforce the beliefs you're trying to change. This is called the backfire effect. A 2010 study by Nyan and Reifler demonstrated that for people with strong prior beliefs, corrections didn't just fail to change their minds. They actually strengthened the original belief. The more threatening the correction felt, the more people doubled down. For collective narcissists specifically, this backfire effect is amplified. Remember, their identity is fused with their group and often with their leader. When you attack the belief, you're attacking them personally. Their psychological immune system kicks in to protect the self, and that means fortifying the threatened beliefs. So, direct confrontation doesn't just fail. It often makes things worse. The spectrum of radicalization. Before we get into specific strategies, we need to understand that not everyone is equally reachable. People exist on a spectrum of radicalization, and your approach should depend on where someone falls. Tier 1, the peripherally attached. These are people who may vote a certain way, consume certain media, or express certain views, but haven't made these beliefs central to their identity. They can still distinguish between their sense of self and their political positions. When you challenge their views, they feel disagreed with, not attacked. These people are the most reachable. Conversations can work. Evidence can make a difference. They're not in the grip of collective narcissism. They're in a political position that might shift with new information or changing circumstances. Tier 2, the ideologically committed. These are people who have made the ideology central to their identity, but maintain some separation from specific leaders. They believe strongly in the cause, whether that's conservative principles, Christian nationalism, or MAGA ideology, but they can imagine the cause continuing without any particular leader. With this group, direct debate on facts will largely fail, but they can sometimes be reached through values. If you can find shared values, family, community, fairness, security, you may be able to have productive conversations that don't directly challenge the ideology, but offer alternative frames for understanding issues. Tier 3, the identity fused. These are people who have fully fused their identity with a specific leader. Remember the research? For these individuals, attacks on the leader are experienced as attacks on themselves. Their sense of self has become inseparable from the leader's image. With this group, no amount of evidence about the leader will work, because processing that evidence would require dismantling their sense of self. The psychological cost is simply too high. Any conversation that threatens the leader will trigger massive resistance. For the identity fused, the only pathway is often external. Significant life events, loss of the leader figure, or gradual erosion over time. Individual conversations rarely create change. Though maintaining relationships can matter for when those other factors shift. Research-based conversation strategies. For those in tiers 1 and maybe 2, where conversation can make a difference, here's what the research suggests actually works. Strategy 1. Deep canvassing. Deep canvassing emerged from political organizing research and has shown remarkable effectiveness at changing attitudes on emotionally charged issues. The approach? Instead of presenting facts or arguments, you ask the person to share their own experiences and feelings related to an issue. You listen without judgment. You share your own relevant experiences. You ask follow-up questions that help them explore their own thinking. A landmark 2016 study published in Science found that a single deep canvassing conversation of about 10 minutes produced attitude changes that lasted at least 3 months, far longer than traditional persuasion techniques. Why does it work? Deep canvassing bypasses the defensive response because you're not attacking their position. You're inviting them to examine it themselves. When people feel heard rather than judged, The threat response doesn't activate, and genuine reflection becomes possible. Strategy 2. Socratic questioning. Rather than presenting counterarguments, you ask questions that invite the person to examine the logical consistency and evidence basis of their own beliefs. For collective narcissism specifically, effective questions might include, what would America getting the recognition it deserves actually look like? How would we know when we'd achieved it? If the leader were gone tomorrow, what would happen to the movement? Would the values continue? When you think about the perceived enemy group, do you know anyone from that group personally? How does that person compare to what you hear in the media? The key is genuine curiosity. If your questions are thinly veiled attacks, the person will sense it and shut down. But if you're genuinely asking because you want to understand their thinking, sometimes they start examining it themselves. Strategy 3. Affirmation before challenge. Research on self-affirmation theory shows that when people feel their core values have been acknowledged, they become more open to information that might otherwise feel threatening. Before introducing any challenging information, affirm something genuine about the person's values, character, or intentions. This isn't manipulation. It's recognizing that defensive barriers come from feeling threatened, and reducing that threat perception creates space for actual thinking. For example, you could say, I know you care deeply about America and want what's best for your family. I do too, even though we might see some things differently. Can I share something I've been thinking about? Strategy 4. Finding the shared value. Most political disagreements are actually disagreements about means, not ends. Almost everyone wants safety, prosperity, freedom, and respect for their community. The disagreement is about how to achieve those things. When you can find the shared underlying value, you change the conversation from us versus them to two people who want the same thing, exploring different paths to get there. This doesn't mean pretending you agree when you don't. It means finding the level of values where you genuinely do agree and building from there. Critical thinking questions? Question 1. How do I handle family members I can't avoid? This is the question I hear the most. You can choose not to engage with strangers on the internet, but you can't always choose not to see your family member at Thanksgiving. First, assess which tier they're in. If they're identity fused, tier 3, your goal shouldn't be changing their mind. It should be maintaining the relationship for when other factors create an opening. That means setting boundaries on what you'll discuss, redirecting to shared interests, and protecting your own well-being. For Tier 1 or Tier 2 family members, you have more options, but consider whether holidays and family gatherings are the right venue. Deep canvassing works best one-on-one in low-pressure settings, when you have time for a real conversation. A crowded kitchen before dinner isn't that. Sometimes the most strategic thing you can do is maintain the relationship without trying to change anything, because that relationship is what gives you credibility if and when an opening appears. Question 2. What if they're spreading dangerous misinformation? This is harder. There's a difference between someone holding views you disagree with and someone actively spreading information that could cause harm. Research on misinformation suggests that public fact checks often backfire with the person being corrected. but they can prevent the misinformation from spreading to bystanders who are less committed to the false belief. So in public settings, social media, group conversations, brief, calm corrections with credible sources can help inoculate others, even if they don't change the mind of the person posting. In private conversations, the deep canvassing approach is still more likely to create genuine change. Question 3. Is it worth the emotional cost? This is a question only you can answer, and the answer isn't always yes. Engaging with collective narcissism is emotionally taxing. You're dealing with people who may become hostile, who may say hurtful things, who may attack your identity as readily as you're trying not to attack theirs. The research on activist burnout is clear. Sustained engagement requires boundaries. Not every conversation is worth having. Not every relationship is worth fighting for. And your well-being matters, not just for your sake, but because burned out, depleted people can't effectively contribute to solutions. Strategic retreat is sometimes the right choice. Here are your concrete action items from today's episode. 1. Assess before engaging. Before any conversation, assess which tier the person is in. Tier 1, peripherally attached. Conversation can work. Use deep canvassing techniques. Tier 2, ideologically committed. Focus on shared values rather than facts. Tier 3, identity fused. Maintain relationship. Set boundaries. Wait for openings. 2. Practice deep canvassing techniques. If you want to have these conversations effectively, practice the skills. Active listening without interrupting. Asking genuine questions. Sharing your own experiences without preaching. Affirming before challenging. These aren't natural for most people. They require practice. 3. Experiment with gratitude mindfulness. If you have ongoing relationships with people showing collective narcissistic patterns, consider whether you can introduce gratitude practices without making them political. What are you grateful for this week at family dinners? Sharing your own gratitude practice. This isn't about tricking people. It's about cultivating psychological health that, according to research, reduces the need for collective narcissism. 4. Set and maintain boundaries. Decide in advance what you will and won't engage on. What topics are off limits in certain settings? What behaviors will cause you to end a conversation? Having clear boundaries and consistently maintaining them protects your well-being and models healthy behavior. 5. Document patterns. Keep notes on what works and what doesn't with specific people. What questions opened up reflection? What topics triggered shutdown? This isn't about manipulation. It's about learning. Over time, patterns emerge that help you be more effective. 6. Focus your energy. You cannot change everyone. Focus your energy on the Tier 1 and Tier 2 people in your life. The ones where conversation can actually make a difference. For Tier 3, maintain relationships without expecting change, and invest your persuasion energy elsewhere. The research gives us hope, but realistic hope. We know what works. Gratitude practices that address underlying emotional needs, deep canvassing that creates space for genuine reflection, shared values that transcend political divisions. And we know what backfires. Direct confrontation, fact-bombing, attacking leaders who've become fused with people's identities. But here's the harder truth. Individual conversations, even skillfully conducted, aren't enough to address a systemic problem. Collective narcissism isn't just a matter of individual psychology. It's cultivated by media ecosystems, political incentives, and social structures. That's why in Part 2, we'll shift focus to systemic counter-strategies, how communities, institutions, and movements can respond, how we build alternatives that provide belonging without requiring enemies, and how we protect democratic structures from the need for chaos. Until then, I'm Sera. This is Ethos Trek. Stay informed, stay strategic, and take care of yourself while you take care of democracy.